The first-class cabin of the luxury flight from New York to London had the quiet hum of privilege. Plush leather seats, dimmed golden lighting, and personalized service made the experience one of exclusivity. For the passengers seated there, this wasn't just a flight. It was a statement of status, a reminder that they belonged among the world's elite. James Holloway, a brash, self-important businessman in his early 40s, leaned back in his seat, swirling a glass of whiskey between his fingers. He was the type who spoke just a little too loudly, ensuring that everyone around him knew exactly how important he was. "You ever flown private?" he asked the well-dressed woman seated across the aisle, flashing his expensive Rolex as he took a sip. She gave him a polite but disinterested smile, nodding once before turning back to her tablet. James didn't care. He was used to talking, used to making his presence known. Just then, the last first-class passenger boarded, an older man in a simple dark pullover and jeans, carrying a well-worn leather bag. His salt and pepper hair was neatly styled, and despite his casual clothing, he carried himself with an air of confidence that didn't need to be announced. James glanced at him and immediately felt annoyed. This guy didn't fit in. James turned to the flight attendant, raising an eyebrow. "We're letting economy passengers in now?" he muttered under his breath. The flight attendant's polite smile didn't waver. "He's a first-class passenger, sir." James scoffed, shaking his head. "Could have fooled me." As the older man settled into his seat, directly next to James, James sighed dramatically, making a show of adjusting his jacket and shifting away. "First time in first class?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. The man turned his head slightly, meeting his gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. James smirked, nodding toward the cabin. "I can always tell when someone's new to this level of luxury. Must be exciting for you." The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Something like that." James took this as an invitation to continue talking. "You know what I can't stand?" he continued, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "When people buy their way into first class without actually earning it." The man raised an eyebrow. "Oh!" James nodded eagerly. "Yeah, used to be. First class was filled with real business leaders, executives, people who actually make things happen. Now, anyone with a lucky break or a viral video can sit here." He took a sip of his whiskey, shaking his head. "I blame celebrities, to be honest. These actors, influencers, they don't belong here." The man exhaled softly as if amused and nodded. "I see." James grinned, mistaking his silence for agreement. "I mean, think about it," he said, gesturing around the cabin. "What do actors actually contribute? It's not like they're running Fortune 500 companies or handling billion-dollar deals. They're just entertainers, right?" The man tilted his head slightly, a knowing smile forming at the corner of his lips. "That's an interesting perspective." James laughed, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "You get it. First class is for people like us, people who actually worked for it." At that moment, the flight attendant approached, her demeanor completely changing when she saw James's seatmate. Her eyes widened, her smile turning genuine. "Mr. Clooney, it's an honor to have you with us today." James's smirk froze instantly. His hand, which had been confidently resting on the armrest, tensed. His brain scrambled to process what he had just heard. George Clooney, the legendary Hollywood actor, director, and humanitarian. James blinked rapidly, feeling his stomach drop as whispers spread through the first-class cabin. Passengers turned their heads, suddenly aware that they were sitting next to one of the most famous men on the planet. James, who had just spent the last 10 minutes openly trashing actors, had been talking to George Clooney the entire time. Clooney turned toward him, the same calm smile still in place. "You were saying something about actors not belonging in first class?" James's mouth opened and closed like a fish, his confidence completely shattered. James Holloway's face burned with humiliation as the first-class cabin buzzed with whispered conversations. He could hear the muffled chuckles, the quiet gasps of realization from other passengers who had figured out exactly what had happened. George Clooney, one of the most well-known actors in the world, had just sat through 10 minutes of being condescendingly lectured by a self-important businessman who believed Hollywood elites didn't belong in first class. And now everyone was watching. The flight attendant, oblivious to the slow-motion car crash unfolding in front of her, continued speaking with a bright, genuine smile. "Mr. Clooney, would you like anything else? We have an exclusive wine selection if you're interested." Clooney gave her an easy, relaxed smile, as if this was just another ordinary moment in his life. "No, I'm good, thank you. Just the coffee." The attendant nodded enthusiastically before glancing at James. "And for you, sir?" James, still frozen in shock, stammered, Water. Just water." Clooney hid a chuckle behind his coffee cup as the attendant walked away. James forced himself to breathe, forcing his mind to grasp for any possible way to recover. "This is fixable, right? I can spin this." He swallowed hard and turned back to Clooney, forcing a painfully fake grin onto his face. "Wow. Didn't recognize you at first," he said, as if this was somehow a casual misunderstanding. "Big fan. Really?" Clooney set his coffee down, studying James with quiet amusement. "Oh, you're a fan?" James nodded too quickly. "Of course. I've seen all your movies." Clooney raised an eyebrow, a smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. "All of them?" James's stomach dropped. Oh no. Passengers leaned in slightly, their interest piqued by the exchange. James forced a laugh, though it came out choked and unnatural. "Yeah, a big fan." Clooney leaned back in his seat, his expression calm and unreadable, but his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. "All right then, what's your favorite?" James's soul left his body. His mind frantically searched for any movie title, but his brain had turned into a blank slate of pure panic. He opened his mouth, paused. Clooney patiently waited, sipping his coffee. 1 second, 2 seconds. James felt every pair of eyes in the cabin staring at him. 3 seconds. A woman 2 rows ahead covered her mouth to hide a giggle. James gritted his teeth, willing himself to say anything. Finally, he forced out the first words his brain could produce. "That one with, the thing." Clooney's smirk widened. "The thing?" James wanted to vanish into the seat. Passengers snickered quietly, some pretending to look at their phones while secretly recording the moment. "Yeah," James continued, his voice cracking under the pressure. "The famous one." Clooney tilted his head. "Ah, that one." James nodded way too eagerly, desperate to escape. "Yeah, love that one." Clooney exhaled, shaking his head with a knowing chuckle. "Relax, kid. You don't have to lie." James, who had spent the entire flight exuding confidence, was now shifting in his seat like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. For the first time in his life, he felt completely, utterly powerless. And Clooney? He was enjoying every second of it. For the rest of the flight, James barely spoke. He sat stiffly in his seat, avoiding eye contact, while Clooney casually conversed with other passengers and the flight attendants as if nothing had happened. James, however, was trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. Whenever a passenger walked by, they stole a knowing glance at him, some with barely contained amusement, others shaking their heads in disbelief at his arrogance. At one point, the businessman from across the aisle, a real CEO who had remained silent during James's initial rant, leaned over slightly and whispered, "Rough day, huh?" James forced a stiff smile and nodded. "Yeah, something like that." The CEO chuckled. "Maybe next time, don't assume you're the smartest guy in the room." James clenched his jaw but said nothing. This flight had turned into the longest, most excruciating 5 hours of his life. As the plane descended toward London, James sat with his arms crossed tightly, wishing he could disappear. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, he rushed to unbuckle himself, ready to get off the plane as quickly as possible. But just as he reached for his bag, Clooney turned to him one last time. James froze, bracing himself for another humiliating moment. But instead of gloating, instead of rubbing salt in the wound, Clooney simply gave him a small, knowing smile. "Hey," James hesitated. "Yeah?" Clooney leaned in slightly. "Next time, try a little kindness." And with that, he grabbed his bag, nodded to the flight attendants, and exited the plane. James sat there staring at his hands, feeling a strange mixture of humiliation and something else. Maybe, just maybe, Clooney was right. As James stepped into the airport terminal, he let out a deep breath, telling himself that at least the nightmare was over, until his phone vibrated, and vibrated again, and again. Confused, he pulled it out and saw notification after notification flooding his screen. Social media was exploding. A video had surfaced. A fellow passenger had recorded their entire exchange and posted it online. Clooney vs. business? Bro was already trending. James's stomach dropped as he clicked on the video and watched his own downfall play out in real time. The comments were brutal. Imagine talking down to George freaking Clooney on a plane. This guy really thought actors didn't belong in first class. Bro, Clooney could buy the airline. 5 hours of secondhand embarrassment. James groaned loudly, stuffed his phone back in his pocket, and marched toward baggage claim, trying to ignore the fact that his humiliation was now permanently documented for the entire world to see. Clooney, meanwhile, he was already on his way to his hotel, sipping another coffee and probably laughing about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Let us know in the comments below.